Okay, are we ready? Okay, so it's 191. We did it briefly last time, but it's the beginning of the new packet. And so the Mishnah, everybody have it? 191?
Yeah.
This one is missing.
So the Mishnah was, we had been talking about if you rent a field, you're a sharecropper, and you've been giving a percentage of the crop as payment. And then the Mishnah switches to what if you're giving a fixed amount, $100 a month, fixed amount, not a percentage of the crop. And then, so we go through that. Then there's the case where you're giving a fixed amount, but the fixed amount's a crop. So you're planting wheat, and in return, you're going to give them a fixed amount of wheat, the landlord a fixed amount of wheat, so like 100 pounds of wheat. And not a percentage, but a fixed amount, but it's wheat. And so the first question the Talmud asks is, what happens if it's a poor crop of wheat, but you only agreed to give him 100 pounds of wheat? Does he have a right to expect good wheat? Or what happens if it's exceptionally good wheat? Does he get that good wheat? Or can you just buy it at the store and it's kind of mediocre wheat? So is the implication when you say I'm going to pay you 100 pounds of wheat in return for using your field where I'm going to plant wheat, does the wheat have to come from the field? Is the expectation that the wheat comes from the field, or are you allowed to, or are you required to purchase it in the store? Okay, that's the question. And what they decide is, it's important, the answer is that you pay from the wheat that you plant. Okay, for better or for worse. So if it's good, then the landlord gets some good wheat. If it's bad, the landlord loses. And you see that you're, in that way, you're tied to the landlord in a kind of partnership. So you're both hoping that the wheat is good that way. So, okay, now we're on 191, and we have a similar case. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, it's verse 4, 5 lines from the top. Okay, Hahu Gavra. Okay, here's the Hahu Gavra is always how they introduce a case. A case comes to the court. This guy, Gavra, Gever, this man, Hahu Gavra de Kabel Pardes Mechavre. So he's leasing and I talked about this last time. There's some difficulty here with the language, but we're going to go past that and say it's a vineyard. So even though Pardes doesn't really mean vineyard, from context it seems to be a vineyard. So there's a vineyard. He leases the vineyard, Be'eser Dane Chamra, for 10 barrels of wine. Okay, so it's a fixed amount. It's also the product of the vineyard, which is actually grapes, but so there is a step in between, I think, right? In between it going from being grapes to wine. There's processing. But it still makes some sense. He's going to pay him in wine. Not in grapes, but he's going to pay him in wine. Okay? Takifahu chamra. And the wine goes bad. So that's an interesting case. So does he pay him the bad wine because the wine went bad? Or does the landlord say, no, you promised me 100 barrels of wine, and I didn't expect worthless wine. I mean, what good is that? Or can he expect grapes? So what do you do with that? Okay? Savar Rav Kahana Lememar. So Rav Kahana thought to say, Hainu mat nitni. And so Rabbeinu said, I'll follow the teaching, the Mishnah actually that we had. Lakta noten la mitocha. We actually have a very simple principle. If the crop goes bad, you still pay him from the bad crop. Okay. The difference in this case, of course, is that we don't know if the crop went bad.
Or the process.
It might have just been the processing that went bad, which would mean the guy's a decent farmer, but he's not a very good winemaker. And then why would the landlord have to pay for that? Okay. At the same time, you can see the similarity. You pay from the crop. Okay, here's what the crop gave me. It gave me bad wine. It was your field to begin with. Okay, that's the question. And Rav Kahana is inclined. That's what they say. He's inclined to say you pay him from the crop itself, so he has to take the bad wine. However, Amar le Ravashi. Ravashi says to him, Midami. Ravashi says they're not the same case. Hatam lo avda arash lichuta. So in the case of the wheat, and you end up with bad wheat, it's the land that's at fault. So, and he phrases it in an interesting way. The land didn't do its job. You hired the land to give you wheat, and it was the land that didn't give you the wheat. Okay, so you can't blame either the guys, right? It's the land. So then the landlord gets what the land. In other words, the landlord gets what the land gives. Right, exactly. Hacha, but here, avda arish lichuta. But here, presumably, the land gave forth good grapes, and it was only in the processing of the grapes that the wine went bad. Okay, so Rav Ashi is disagreeing with the statement and actually saying that no, you have to go and purchase 10 barrels of wine and give him decent wine. Umode Rav Ashi, but Rav Ashi would admit that he has to take the bad wine, be'invei dechadum. Okay, if it was, these are wormy grapes. So in other words, if there was something wrong with the grapes, and it was those bad grapes that made the bad wine, then the landowner has to take that in payment. And now they actually change the subject, but it's related. Uvisadeh shalakta ba'omareha. It's interesting, just a few words, they introduce a whole different complication. What happens in general in a field after the harvest? So the land did its job, right, and it produced good, whatever it might be. Here it's not grapes anymore, and you were bounding them up in sheaves. Okay, interesting. We're coming to Shavuot, where we celebrate the binding up in sheaves. Omer, you leave on the ground. The Omer, you bind them up in sheaves before you come and collect them. But you harvest them, you bind them up in sheaves. What if something happens to the crop before you go and collect them, but they're bound up in sheaves? So Rav Ashi actually says in that case, it's the land's fault also, and you have to pay them. So if there's some kind of fungus that infects the crop after it's been harvested, but it's still in the field, you still blame the field for that. So the issue is, are you blaming the field or are you blaming the farmer? If it's the farmer's fault, then the farmer has to find some other way of paying the landowner. If it's the field's fault, then you just pay the landowner from what happened to the field. And this is kind of an interesting case. What happens if it's already been harvested, but there's something in the field itself that created the fungus that destroyed the bound crops already? Okay, the sheaves. All right, are we clear on this? Any questions? Really? Okay. It's complicated stuff, actually.
Actually, this isn't processing in the same sense that making the wine from the grapes.
It's not processing. Just leaving it there. There's something in the field, maybe an insect or something that's in the field that's creating it. So therefore you blame the field.
Right.
Yeah.
There could be a hailstorm.
Yeah.
Farmers today, it's one of the risks that farmers always take.
If you're just leaving the crop out there, right.
But
In those days they didn't have...
It's impossible to harvest it and do all of that in one day.
Yeah,
so
right.
Even today.
Right. Even today, right. Certainly in those days.
Right.
Certainly it's very common. We wouldn't have the period of the Omer, which is really just the 49 days between the harvest and then finally you're ficking and you're cleaning up all the bound sheaves. That's the agricultural origin of the Omer, which is the period between Passover and Shavuot. It's just the time where they couldn't collect it all, so they would bound it up in sheaves, and they would do it for 49 days, and you would count down until the final summer harvest, where you've collected all the bound sheaves and the rest of the crops. So that's the agricultural origin, which means it's probably actually the origin of the festival, and then we've later imposed the distance between Passover and Sinai. Okay.
Do we know whether, in this particular case, the person who is I can think of the word, renting the field.
Sharecropper. We've been calling him the sharecropper,
yeah. Is he required to pay back with wine instead of grapes?
Well, that was the agreement. He's not required to do anything.
But
it's whatever they agree to.
A specific contract.
Yeah, that was the contract. Yeah, we're always dealing with the contract. Yeah. And so if that's what they're saying. So if and apparently there was a case. He actually contracted to pay in wine. The wine went bad. It goes to the rabbis, and they try to go back to first principles and precedents and try to figure it out. Okay. All right, now we go to another Mishnah. Mishnahs are coming fast and furious relative to the pace of the Talmud. So, Hamekabel sadeh mechavera lizar'a seorim. Okay, so you make an agreement to lease a field to plant barley. The barley harvest is also what we celebrate during Shavuot. Yeah, and also that's what happens in the book of Ruth. It's the barley harvest. So I didn't do this on purpose, but it's very timely. Yeah, we're coming up to the end of the Omer. Shavuot is next week. By the way, next Wednesday, we'll be studying. We'll be taking a break from this and studying some material have to do with Shavuot, not Ruth. Ruth will do during services. Okay. So anyhow, so the contract is to plant barley. Lo yizra'en chitim. If you agree to contract if you contract barley, you can't then plant wheat, which sounds obvious. But you'll see something here. Chitim, Yisra and Seorim. But if you agree to plant wheat, you are allowed to plant barley. Why would that be? So why would you not be? You contracted for barley. You can't plant wheat. You contracted for wheat. you can plant barley. According to this, what's easier on the field? Less wear and tear on the field. Barley, obviously barley, right. So if you agree to plant barley, you can't go and plant wheat, which takes more water, more wear and tear on the field. However, if you agree to plant wheat, you assume, and here's it's tricky, these assumptions too, but you're assuming that the landowner doesn't mind that if you then plant barley, even though you agreed to plant wheat, because barley is worth the same, but it's less wear and tear on the field. Okay?
Didn't we just?
We did. We talked about this. Yeah, we have.
You just said the opposite.
Well, you'll see. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel oser. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that's forbidden. So he says that you have to follow the contract. Okay? But there is an opinion that if it's going to be easier on the field, even without clarifying it first with the landowner, you're allowed to switch crops. You can't do the opposite and suddenly plant a crop that's harder on the field. But you can plant a crop without telling the owner if it's easier on the field. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who was the president of the Sanhedrin and, of course, the major authority, he doesn't allow this. Okay? What we'll discuss is why he doesn't allow it, although it's a much cleaner system. You just follow the contract. Right. And this idea that you're trying to read the mind, I'm doing you a favor, you'll see that Talmud occasionally brings that up, but never really likes that. I'm doing you a favor, and of course you would have liked it. I didn't ask you, but I knew it would be okay with you. Right. Okay. But then it goes on. Tfu'ah. So tfu'ah is any kind of grain. It's a generic term for grain. Lo yizra'ena kitnit. You're not then allowed to plant beans. Okay, it's a generic term. You hear the word kitniot in there too, which we talk about on Passover, but legumes. But let's just say it's beans. It's a generic term for beans. So if you agree to plant grain, you can't then plant beans, which teaches us something about farming they may not have known, which is that beans are harder on the soil than grain. Kitnit yizra'ena tfu'ah. So this anonymous opinion says that if you contract to plant beans, you are allowed then to switch without telling the owner and plant grain, because grain is easier on the soil, so you're doing the landowner a favor and you don't have to check with him first. But Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel oser. But Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that's not allowed, prohibited. Okay? Yeah. So he's consistent. Both are consistent. Both are saying that if you can pick something that's easier in the field, you can change without telling the owner. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel in both cases says no. Okay? Got it? That's the Mishnah. Pretty simple Mishnah. And the Mishnah, as it often does, includes a disagreement. And then later generations have to figure out what the law is. Sometimes, by the way, and the Gemara then discusses it. Sometimes it depends on the location. What's the law in one case is not the law in the other case. Just like Sephardim and Ashkenazim, or people just choose Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Yeah.
You seem to be missing something here in that the landowner may have already made a deal for whatever the grain is to sell to another party.
Right.
And by this sharecropper switching it, it can totally throw it.
It can messes it up. Yeah. He's expecting wheat.
Right.
And so you give him a bunch of barley.
That's why I'm wondering about.
Well, that would be Rabbi Shimon Gamliel would say just stick to the contract. Yeah. Now I could complicate things more and just say that since really these things are fungible in the sense. So if he was expecting barley and he got wheat, as long as he gets the same value, rough value, market value, then he's okay.
That's the other part of it. If the price of one is going higher than the other, then you're getting the inferior price.
Well, that's why you have Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel just says, look, just plant what you said you're going to plant. The Mishnah does pick things which are equivalent in value, not always the same, but more or less equivalent in value. So the landowner is probably not going to care in either case. But you're right. I mean, the landowner, and you'll see. I mean, actually, you're anticipating one of the objections. So that's why I didn't want to go too far into it. I don't think we'll get to it today, but let's see. Anyhow, Amar Rav Chisda says, my Tama to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. So Rav Chisda wants to know, what is his basic system? What's the reason for Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel? Got that? Okay. Dichtiv. And now, when they asked that. They asked that hypothetically. He's not in the room. I mean, Rav Chisda is many generations after, really 300-400 years after Shimon ben Gamliel. So he's actually, you get the sense sometimes that they're all in the room together and that they're all arguing this out. And it's only later when you look and you understand when they lived that they're not. So when they say what was the reason for Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, it means what do you think was the reason of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel? What would you assume was the reason of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel? Because he's not there to answer. So now we're going to speak in his name. We're going to read his mind and figure this is probably what he would say what he would say, what he would reply. Dichtiv. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel would probably reply with the following verse, knowing Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel as I did. That's kind of the implication. Understanding his personality and his way of thought, my guess is he would choose the following verse, which is a really interesting verse. She'erit Yisrael lo yasu avla. The remnant of Israel, which is another way of saying Jews, the Jews that are left, shouldn't do dishonest things, will not do dishonest things. V'lo yidabru chazaf, and will not speak deceptions. V'lo yimatzeh b'fihem l'shon tarmit, and there shouldn't be found in their mouths words of cheating. It's my own awkward translation. That's more or less what those things mean. Okay? So he finds a verse that actually just is against dishonesty in very strongly and very poetically. Gives 3 examples of dishonesty and says, that's why you don't plant wheat when you promise to plant barley, even if it's doing the owner a favor, because you promised to plant wheat. And that's not something Jews do. That's really what he said, because there's mention Jews and there's mention of dishonesty. Jews should not be doing this, and that's simple enough, right? So that way you actually get Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's very clear system about this is when you say you're going to do something, you do it. You don't lie. You don't cheat. Okay? Meitvei. Okay, but now we have an objection. The objection is that, wait a second, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was not always consistent in that view. So we have an interesting example, and I have to say it's a very important little piece here, which it just by the way, but it teaches us something important about how they view charity and giving to the poor in general. Okay, so 193. So the Meitvei means an objection. Migbat Purim lePurim. Okay, so there was a charity collection where you would have a fund for the poor people so they'd be able to celebrate Purim. Okay? It was a custom in those days. We still have today, we have the gifts to the poor, Matnot Levyonim on Purim, but usually it's a plate of Hamantashen. Right. So thanks very much. Right. Right. In those days it was actually cash, but the cash was meant to go so they could buy wine, because wine was expensive, because you're supposed to get drunk on Purim. So they could celebrate Purim. That was the money it was supposed to go to. Now, what happens if the money goes to something else? Instead of buying liquor to get drunk, they waste the money and buy, food for their children. Hey, you were supposed to get drunk with that money. It's the opposite of our fear. Our fear is they're going to take it and get drunk, but the fear in the Talmud is they're not going to get drunk with it. That's what the collection is for. But there's a general principle here: is that when money is collected for poor people, do the poor people have an obligation to use that money exactly what it's for? I'm collecting money so you can buy school uniforms for your kids. What if you go and buy lottery tickets for it, or you decide something else? I'm going to buy something else for my kids. I'm going to buy cereal for my kids. So what happens if the poor don't follow what's an implicit contract? Explicit contract sometimes, right? Okay. Anyway, first of all, they tell us, Ein medakdekin badavar. Now, they throw this out there, and it's analyzed in other places in the Talmud, but I want to point it out here. You don't check for need.
For what?
For need. For need. So if someone says they need the money, you actually don't check. You're not allowed to check and see if they need it or not. You take their word for it. So that's already interesting. And it's discussed in other places, but the understanding is that no one's just going to come and say they're in need unless they're in need. It's too embarrassing. So you don't check it. You don't further humiliate the person who's already humiliated by asking for money. So you don't further humiliate the person by checking to see, are you really in need? Okay? The ein ha'ani rashai lekach mehen ritzuah l'sandalo. Okay, and then the poor person can't go and buy a strip for his sandals, which presumably is a very big need. Okay, but you can't do that. Ela im kain hitna b'ma'amad anshei ha'ir, unless he checks first with the people who run the fund. Okay, so in other words, he can do it, but he can't do it without asking first. Now, presumably they're going to say yes, but the money is for a specific purpose. The money is so the poor family can celebrate Purim. All right, so it's actually 2 very important principles. One is that you don't check and make sure the person's poor. You take the person's word for it. However, if they're going to use the money for something other than Purim, and the example they give, it's just an example, it could be for anything, but the example they give is a legitimate need. I mean, you need sandals, you need shoes in life. You can't do that unless you check first with the people that run the fund. Okay? All right. However, Divrei Rabbi Yaakov. So Rabbi Yaakov's Shamar Mishum Rabbi Meir. Okay? And these are the words of Rabbi Yaakov, who said it in the name of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel mekel, but Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel did allow it. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, remember the whole thing's about Shimon ben Gamliel, and we're back to beans and wheat, and but so we're out of the world of the, so in a whole different system of thought, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel seems to allow, I'm not going to say lying, but diverting from the contract without checking first. Now, like I said, the reason it's an interesting case is presumably the people that own the fund, not the owners of the fund, but the people that run the fund are not going to object to that. They're going to say, sure, you can take this poor money and get your kids shoes. Of course you can do that. But one rabbi says, but check first. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says he doesn't have to check first. Okay? And now we, the rabbis, are wondering, wait a second, that's inconsistent. Because before Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is saying, do what you say. And if the contract was for wheat, you have to plant wheat. Here also, the fund, and there's an implicit agreement, I'm going to use this money to celebrate Purim, and you're changing it. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is inconsistent, and we're trying now to understand the inconsistency. Yeah.
Well, one thing, brother, you keep referring to a contract between the poor that receives the money, but there's no real contract.
Right.
Maybe it's an understanding or implication, but there's no contract.
Right. So that's a difference. Yeah, that is a difference.
With the wheat and
it's clearly a contract. Yeah. Okay. So that is one way to solve that too. Still there's such a thing as implicit contracts. I mean, I'm just pushing back a little bit. And even in law today, certainly in the Talmud, I mean, not everything could be written out and signed. Yeah. So there definitely were implicit contracts where, if there's a sign over the fund that says this money should go for Purim celebration, and you're taking the money, you could make an argument that you're accepting that implicit contract. And all you have to do is check. It's not that hard to do. You just check and you say, look, I want to do this for shoes instead. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is allowing that. So why is he allowing it? That's what they're wondering. Was there another?
So, if somebody is giving something to somebody else, charity, whatever, the other person takes possession, doesn't that more or less they have control over it? I mean, without strings, without somebody saying, checking afterwards.
Well, that's very interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, the thing is that a lot of people would disagree with that, especially in charitable giving. The money's supposed to go for very specific events. I mean, we have that here too. What if somebody makes a donation now I've got the money, so it's too bad. I'm sorry that I agreed to.
And that may not be the person's greater need. I mean, you're giving something to somebody, and let them decide what their need is.
Well, so this is what's interesting too. I mean, the donors, because presumably there's donors to this fund. And the donor's saying, I want the poor people in my town to be able to celebrate Purim, and that's why I'm donating to this. And maybe they would agree to the guy buying shoes, but that's why they gave the money. So that's where the contract comes in. So there are implicit contracts in giving. And so that's what the discussion's about. I mean, how elastic is that contract? So he's using it for something else. What's interesting is, I have to say, to me it's very interesting, is right away we dispense with any discussion of does he need it or not. We accept the word of the person. But what we're concerned about, is he going to use it for the correct purpose? And it's not so much the purpose that's good for him, not good for him. Like you have welfare advocates today are wondering, is it really good for the poor that we support X, Y, and Z? Here we're not talking about that. We're talking about the intent of the donors, the intent of the fund. And that sounds like a contract. And it seems to me that's actually an interesting, they're both interesting topics, but that's an interesting topic too. Do you have to stick to what the intent of the fund is? Yeah.
So one difference here is that the recipient, the poor person, isn't treated equally as the donor. Uh-huh. He can be embarrassed by having to ask.
Yeah, right.
The donor can do whatever he wants with this money. Right. But the poor person, you want him to have to ask if he wants to switch something. So that's a little bit, in a contract, Mr. A and Mr. B are equal.
Right.
But
that's a really nice point.
It's not really.
Yeah. And that might explain Shimon ben Gamliel. Don't further humiliate him by making him ask if he can buy shoes.
Right.
Yeah, and what Michael says, just treat him as a free agent. He's got the money. Okay. Now, on the other hand, there presumably are funds in town for shoes, or funds in town for just general purposes. Like, so, But you could say the poor person couldn't make it to that fund that day. He can only make it to the Purim fund, right? Yeah, right. He needed the shoes right away. Money was in his pocket. So yeah, there's all sorts of things we could. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of discussion. This isn't the topic here. The topic is wheat and beans, but it comes up. All right, last comment, then we'll finish.
It sounds like the need of the giver is taking precedence over the need of the person.
Well, it's the responsibility of the donors. It's not the needs of the donors, but it's the integrity of this. It's the integrity of the system. I mean, remember, this is what you find, of course, in the nonprofit world is that the integrity of the system benefits everybody. And if people are using the money not for purposes for which it's intended, then suddenly, then really the people that suffer most are the poor people. Right? Then no one's going to give. So people don't give unless they're assured that the money's going to go to what they give to. Then they're going to stop giving, and then it's not the fund itself that suffers; it's the poor people that benefit from it that suffer. So there's an attempt here to maintain the dignity, the integrity of the fund, of the system. Okay, let's just finish it off because there's an interesting way you can see they're very different things too. So it's an interesting way they resolve the conflict. So Amar Abaye. So Abaye, and again, it's just a suggestion of how you could square these two issues. Tama de Rabbi Shimon Kidamar. So Rabbi Shimon, the same Rabbi Shimon is probably thinking like a person known as Mar. The word Mar is master. It actually wasn't his name, but we called him master. Demar Mar, as Mar said. Hai manda nichale litbor are. You could imagine a person that wants to take care of his field. Litbor are actually means to let your land lie fallow, but it's a general term that means the things that you do to take care of your field, like crop rotation or letting the land lie fallow. Okay? So Mar is saying there could be a landowner that has a specific way of taking care of his field. And this is similar to what Sam brought up, although it's not exactly the same. Lizara shata chite v'shata sare. What he might be doing is rotating crops. 1 year with barley, 1 year with wheat. Shata shti. 1 year he's going to plant with crosswise, horizontal. 1 year he's going to plant vertical. And by changing the contract, v'shata are, v'lo amran ela delo kare v'tane, aval kare v'tane late lamba. So what he's saying is that by changing the crop without telling him, you are messing up his system of crop rotation, which is for his field. And that might be the whole purpose of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. So it has nothing to do with honesty. It's that the landowner has he has a need for barley based on his system of crop rotation. And if you're messing up that system of crop rotation, then
it's doing harm to
you're doing harm. So, and he says that, and in a general sense, this is the problem with trying to read the mind of the person with whom you're in contract with and doing him a favor. You may not have thought of everything. The landowner could say back, no, this was my year to plant barley. Now, I didn't put that in the contract, but I don't have to put everything in the contract because I figured you were going to plant barley. That's what's in the contract. And you did not do me a favor because you actually messed me up. Okay, so it's likely they're saying that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, rather than saying you must all the time follow the contract for poor people, for farmers, no, for this particular case you have to follow the contract because there could be very good reasons why the landowner wants barley, even if it seems to you he'd be as well off or better off with wheat. Okay.
Makes sense.